My name is Callista Rowan, 32 years old. I decided I wasn't going to my sister's wedding long before the actual day arrived, but the invitation still sat on my kitchen counter for weeks, collecting dust and pale brown rings from the bottom of my coffee mugs. It was an elegant little rectangle of heavy cardstock with embossed gold lettering, the kind of thing people post on social media to show off how tasteful their lives are. To everyone else, it was proof of a happy milestone. To me, it was a monument to everything I had walked away from. People always want to know why. They tilt their heads, their voices dripping with that puzzled concern that is really judgment in a softer costume. Why would you miss your own sister's wedding? Aren't families supposed to be unbreakable? As if shared DNA is some kind of moral guarantee, as if blood alone creates loyalty. No one ever asks whether that same blood sometimes carries rot. They weren't there for the years when telling the truth made me the traitor. They didn't see how I was slowly edited out of our family's stories, how the official version of events was adjusted until my reality no longer fit. The falling out wasn't a single explosion. It was pressure building over a decade, like layers of sediment compacting under weight until the ground finally cracks. On the surface, we looked like a normal family with normal dysfunction. A brother who liked to mediate, a younger sister who tried to keep the peace, an older sister who played the golden child, parents who hosted elaborate dinners and insisted we were blessed. Underneath, there was something festering that nobody wanted to name, not out loud. The night everything broke was my dad's birthday dinner. We were all there. The dining room table was laid out like a magazine spread, candles flickering, wine glasses catching the light. My uncle sat across from me, laughing too loudly at something my brother said, his hand resting casually on my older sister's shoulder as he leaned in. That touch made my skin crawl, the way it always had. I remember the weight in my chest, the taste of metal in my mouth as I listened to everyone toast my father, talk about what family meant, how grateful they were to be together. When it was my turn to speak, I couldn't do it. Not the way they wanted. The words that came out were not the ones they expected. I didn't talk about gratitude. I talked about what our uncle had done to me. I talked about how old I was when it started, about who had known and looked the other way, about the years of carefully curated ignorance that allowed him to go on untouched. Mom's face went rigid, every muscle locking into place like a mask snapping on. Dad put his fork down, pushed his chair back, and quietly excused himself as if he'd just remembered a phone call. My siblings stared at me as if I had detonated a bomb in the center of the table. "Why would you bring this up now?" my older sister whispered, her voice sharp with a mix of fear and anger. "Why ruin everything?" As if the damage hadn't been there long before I spoke, as if naming the wound was worse than the wound itself. The months after that were an education in how families rewrite history to protect the story they prefer. Somehow I became the unstable one, the dramatic one, the one who couldn't let things go. My uncle remained a guest of honor at birthdays and holidays. I got silence, then carefully worded texts suggesting therapy, not as support, but as a way to frame my pain as a personal defect. Healing, in their minds, meant I should learn to swallow the poison quietly. So when the wedding invitation arrived, beautiful, formal, impersonal, I understood exactly what it represented. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a test, an ultimatum wrapped in ivory and gold. Come and prove you've moved past your issues. Put on a dress, stand in the photos, smile wide enough to convince everyone we're still whole. I couldn't do it. The morning of the wedding, instead of putting on a dress, I got in my car and drove to the coast. I needed the ocean, the kind of vastness that doesn't require you to make yourself smaller to fit. The sky was pale and low, the kind of gray that blurs the horizon until you can't quite tell where the water ends and the air begins. I walked for hours along the shoreline, sand cold and damp under my shoes, wind slicing through my jacket. With every step, something inside me loosened. Out there was no version of me to defend, no narrative to correct, just the sound of waves pounding the shore like a heartbeat too big to be silenced. The guilt my family had layered onto me, selfish, dramatic, ungrateful, started to peel away under the sting of salt air. My phone buzzed over and over in my pocket, vibrating against my thigh like a trapped insect. I ignored it. Let it ring. Let it buzz. Let them talk. By sunset, the sky had turned a bruised purple at the edges, and my legs ached. Only then did I pull out my phone. 17 missed calls. There was a voicemail from my mother, her voice trembling with that brittle, weaponized disappointment she'd perfected over the years. 3 texts from my brother, full of words like selfish and unforgivable. Sentences that read less like concern and more like a verdict. And then there was a message from my younger sister. It wasn't an apology, or a lecture, or a plea. It was just an address I didn't recognize and 3 words. Come tonight, alone. I stared at the screen, the wind whipping strands of hair across my face. Every survival instinct I'd honed since I left that house told me this could be another trap, another way to pull me back into the orbit of a family that refused to see me as anything but a problem. It felt like bait, like the first line of a story where I already knew my role, the one who walks into the room and ends up cornered. But something about that text felt different. There was a rawness in the simplicity of it. No explanation, no guilt, just coordinates and a quiet urgency I couldn't ignore. Underneath the fear, there was also a thin, stubborn thread of hope. My younger sister had always been the only one who sometimes looked at me like she saw more than the official narrative. By the time the sun disappeared completely and the sky went dark, I had made up my mind. I got in my car and started driving. The address led me to a storage facility on the outskirts of a town I'd never heard of, the kind of place people use to store things they don't want to look at but can't quite throw away. At night, it looked abandoned. A chain-link fence, rows of identical metal doors, fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Unit 447. The lock was already undone, hanging uselessly from the latch. My hands shook as I pulled the metal door up. It groaned loudly, the sound echoing down the concrete corridor. Inside there were boxes, dozens of them, each one labeled in my younger sister's neat handwriting with years written along the side. 1995 to 1997, 1998 to 2001, 2002, 2005. The air smelled like dust and paper and something else, old secrets maybe. I knelt in front of the closest box and lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was a stack of photographs I'd never seen before. My older sister at maybe 17, standing next to our uncle, his hand on her shoulder. Her smile stretched too wide. There was a date written on the back of one of them. It was the same year I had tried to tell them what he did to me. The same year they called me a liar. My stomach dropped. The fluorescent light overhead cast everything in a sickly yellow glow, turning my sister's face in the photo into something almost ghostly. It wasn't just a bad picture. There was something wrong in the way she held herself, like she was trying to disappear while still standing in plain sight. Her smile looked like a wound pretending to be healed. I set the photo down carefully, as if it might shatter, and reached for the next box. This one was labeled 1998-2001. Inside were journals, not my sister's, not mine. They were my uncle's. I recognized his cramped handwriting immediately. Page after page of dates, times, and descriptions that made my throat close. It read like a ledger, a collector's log of violations. He had documented everything, not with shame or regret, but with a meticulous pride that made my skin crawl. I scanned a few lines and felt bile rise in my throat. My legs gave out, and I sank down onto the cold concrete floor. The chill seeped through my jeans, anchoring me to something solid while my understanding of the last 20 years fractured and reassembled into a new, horrifying shape. The third box held letters, dozens of them, all in my older sister's handwriting, some addressed to our parents, some addressed to me, none of them ever sent. I picked one at random, dated 3 years ago, the same period when my contact with the family had dwindled to almost nothing. I see you fighting, she had written. I see you refusing to be silent. And I hate you for it because I never had your courage. I hate you because every time you burn a bridge, I have to look at the way I've been living on the ones still standing and admit they're built over the same rotten foundation. They say you're the troubled one, the dramatic one, and I let them say it because if you're the problem, then I don't have to look at myself. I wanted to tell you at Christmas. I wanted to pull you aside and whisper, "Me too." But then you'd know that when you tried to tell them what he did to you, it was still happening to me. By the time I got to the part where she called herself a coward wearing white, my vision blurred. The letter slipped from my fingers and floated onto the concrete. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes, but the tears came anyway, hot, furious, ancient. Footsteps echoed down the corridor outside. I startled, adrenaline flooding my body. For a second, I pictured my uncle walking in, or my brother, or my parents, ready to drag me back into their version of reality. But it was my younger sister who appeared in the doorway. She was still wearing her bridesmaid dress, a soft lavender color that looked almost gray under the harsh overhead light. Her hair was falling out of its updo, and her mascara had tracked down her cheeks in dark rivers. "You came," she said, voice cracking at the edges. "I wasn't sure you would." I gestured around at the boxes, at the scattered photographs and open journals and letters lying like shrapnel on the floor. "What is all of this?" I asked. "How long have you been collecting this?" 3 years, she said, stepping inside and pulling the door down behind her until we were sealed in. "I found the journals first, in his basement after Grandma died. We were cleaning out the house. He'd stored them in boxes labeled tax documents. I don't know if he forgot about them or if he was just sure no one would ever look too closely." She walked over to one of the boxes and pulled out a leather-bound journal, holding it like something venomous. "There are 17 of these," she said quietly. "They span from 1989 to 2015. You're in them. She's in them." She swallowed hard. "I'm in them." The air left my lungs. "You?" My voice came out thin. "Only once," she said, and her tone went flat, clinical, like she had learned to talk about it from a distance. "I was 14. It was that summer at the lake house. You were already in college. He came into my room one night. The next morning I told Mom. She said I must have misunderstood, that he would never, that I was confused. She looked up at me then, really looked, and I saw the same weight in her eyes that had lived in mine for years. The weight of being dismissed, of having your reality cut out of the family's script. When you spoke up at Dad's birthday dinner," she said, "I wanted to back you up. I wanted to stand up and say, she's telling the truth, all of it. But I was terrified. And then I watched what they did to you, how they turned you into the villain. I thought if I stayed quiet, kept my head down, maybe I could find another way to make it right." "So you started collecting evidence," I said. "Everything I could find," she nodded. "The journals were first. Then I started going through old family photos, really looking at them instead of just smiling at the memories. Patterns popped out. The way his hand always landed on her shoulder, the way she stopped smiling with her eyes around 16, the way Mom's face would tighten for a split second whenever someone said his name, then smooth over again like nothing had happened." She sat down among the boxes, her lavender dress pooling around her like a wilted flower. "I went through Mom's old day planners," she continued. "She used to take our older sister to a therapist twice a week for 3 years in high school. There's no note about why. When I asked her about it last year, she said she didn't remember any therapy. She's lying. They're all lying. They've been lying so long, they believe their own version." "The wedding was at 4, she said, glancing at her phone. "It's almost 9 now. They're probably at the reception. Mom has definitely told everyone you had some emergency, something that makes you look flaky, but still forgivable. That's how she works. She manages the story." My anger flared. "Then why did you stay?" I asked, the words harsher than I intended. "Why did you put on that dress and stand up there next to her knowing all of this?" "Because she asked me to," my younger sister said, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 weeks ago, she showed up at my apartment in the middle of the night. She'd been drinking, not falling down drunk, just sustained. She sat on my couch and said, "I know." "She knew you'd found the journals?" I asked. "She knew I'd found something," my sister replied. "She'd been searching too. After Grandma died, she went through the house looking for anything that proved what he did. She didn't find the journals because I'd already taken them, but she found letters he wrote her. He called them love letters. They were just another form of documentation." My younger sister reached into another box and pulled out a stack of envelopes bound with a rubber band, then placed them in my hands. "She gave me these," she said. "She said, I need you to keep them somewhere safe, somewhere he can't get to them, somewhere Mom and Dad can't destroy them if they find out." She told me about this unit. She's been renting it for 5 years. Since before you spoke up, she's been collecting her own evidence too. "Then why didn't she stand with me?" I asked, the question scraping my throat. "Why didn't she say anything when I did?" "Because she's marrying someone who works with him," my younger sister said, the words landing like stones. "Not our uncle. Someone at his firm. Someone who's known him for years and thinks he's the greatest guy. Someone whose approval matters for her fiancé's career. She told me she feels trapped, that this marriage is her exit strategy. He's kind. He doesn't know any of this, and she's terrified that if it all comes out, he'll leave. She said she doesn't know how to exist outside of what was done to her, and pretending everything is fine is the only way she knows how to move forward. I wanted to be furious with my older sister. I wanted to call her a coward and mean it. But all I felt was a crushing sadness for the girl in those photographs, and the woman who had grown up believing that silence was the price of survival. She wanted you to have all of this, my younger sister said softly, gesturing to the boxes. She wanted you to know you weren't crazy, that you weren't lying, that it wasn't you. She wanted you to understand why she can't be the one to blow it all up. She needs you to decide what to do. That's not fair, I said, my voice rough. She's putting this on me. I know it's not fair, my sister replied. Nothing about this is fair. But she's right about one thing. You're the only one of us who's ever told the truth and refused to back down. You walked away rather than pretend. You chose yourself when none of us did. And what do you want? I asked her. What do you want me to do? She was quiet for a long time, staring at the scattered evidence. The coward in me, she said finally, wants you to burn it all down, to take every journal, every photograph, every letter, and make it impossible for them to keep lying. The other part of me knows that if you do, it won't just destroy him. It'll destroy Mom and Dad for what they did. It'll shatter the version of our family our brother clings to. It'll rip apart everything that's been holding this mess together. She looked up at me, eyes red-rimmed but steady. And maybe, she said, maybe that's exactly what needs to happen. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I left the storage unit after my younger sister did, locking the door behind me, even though the lock suddenly felt like a flimsy gesture, like putting a Band-Aid over a gaping wound. The drive home was a blur of headlights and the soft hum of my car engine fighting the weight in my chest. When I walked into my apartment, the silence felt different, thicker, heavier, like the air itself knew what I'd just stepped into. I set all the evidence on my kitchen table. Boxes, journals, letters, photographs. I didn't turn on music or the TV. I needed the quiet. I needed to hear my own breathing, so I knew I was still alive. Then I started working. I photographed everything. Every page of every journal, every letter, every photograph, every date written in his handwriting, every line that made my stomach twist. I created folders, backups, encrypted drives. I uploaded copies to a cloud server with redundancies. I sent a locked copy to my lawyer. I set up an automatic trigger to release everything to 2 journalists if I didn't check in within 72 hours. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. When I finished, it was almost 4 a.m. My eyes burned, my hands shook, but for the first time in years, the fog in my mind had cleared. I wasn't the unstable one. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't the problem. They were. As dawn crept up behind the buildings outside my window, painting everything with a faint pink glow, I realized there was no going back. My sisters had both chosen silence in their own ways, but they had also chosen me now, not publicly, not loudly, but they had chosen to trust me with the truth. The brunch was at 11, a family celebration, a continuation of the wedding festivities, a perfectly staged performance of love and unity and legacy. My younger sister's words echoed in my ears, witnesses. By 11:30, I was walking across my parents' backyard. Caterers carried trays of food. A string quartet played something soft and expensive. Relatives in pastel dresses and neat button-downs chatted under white tents. It looked like every other family gathering we'd ever had, except for the way every conversation died when people noticed me. Mom's face went white. Dad froze mid-bite, his fork holding a small triangle of cake. My brother shot to his feet, jaw tightening, already preparing his favorite role, the one where he gets to scold me on behalf of the family. And then my uncle stepped forward. "Well," he said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, "look who decided to grace us with her presence. Thought you had better things to do." A few people gave awkward little laughs, the kind that come from not knowing the joke is actually a threat. "I did have better things to do," I said. My voice sounded strange in my own ears. Steady, almost quiet, but sharp. "I was reading your journals." The quartet faltered. A violinist missed a note. Someone dropped a fork. My uncle's smile didn't fall off his face all at once. It cracked slowly, like ice. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but the warmth in his voice was gone. I took out my phone. "I'm sending everyone here a link." I hit the button I'd prepared hours earlier. Phones around the yard started vibrating. "It leads to photographs, documents, letters, and journal entries written by him. records of abuse spanning decades, including his abuse of me and of others. Mom moved so fast she nearly knocked over her chair. "Stop," she hissed. "Enough. This is exactly the kind of—" "Mom!" Another voice cut through hers. My older sister. She stood from her table. Her wedding ring glinted in the sunlight. Her hands trembled. Her new husband looked at her with growing confusion. "Don't. Please don't." My mother turned toward her. "Sweetheart, you don't understand what she's doing." "Yes," my older sister said, "I do." She walked toward me, and every step looked like it cost her something. "She's telling the truth." There was a collective gasp. My aunt covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "No," under their breath. My older sister took a deep breath. "He abused me too, from 15 to 21. Mom knew, Dad knew, and they protected him." Silence fell across the backyard like a thick blanket smothering every sound. Then my younger sister rose from her seat. Her face was pale. Her lavender bridesmaid dress crinkled as she walked. She joined us without looking back. "Me too," she said softly, "when I was 14. My uncle's face drained of color. He turned to my father, then to my brother, then to the relatives around him, silently begging someone, anyone, to rescue him. But the phones kept buzzing. People were scrolling, reading, seeing evidence, seeing his handwriting, seeing dates, seeing what he had done. "This is fabricated," he said, his voice breaking. "They're lying. They've always hated me." I stepped forward. Why would we lie? For what? What exactly would we gain? He had no answer. My brother finally pushed his way through the crowd, his face red and furious. "You're destroying this family," he shouted. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? You're tearing us apart." "The family was torn apart a long time ago," my older sister said. "We just refused to look at the pieces." Dad stood up slowly, looking 10 years older in the span of a single breath. "Why now?" he asked. "Why ruin her wedding? Why today?" "Her wedding was yesterday," I said. "This is today, the day we stop pretending, the day we stop protecting the person who hurt us." Mom's voice cracked. "What do you want? What do you want from us?" "Accountability," my older sister said. "Consequences," my younger sister whispered. Mom looked at me last. Her eyes were wild. "And you? What do you want?" I looked at my uncle, at my parents, at the tables full of people scrolling through decades of truth we had carried alone. "I want you to understand that protecting a predator doesn't preserve a family," I said. "It destroys it. I didn't destroy anything today. I just ended the fantasy." We turned and walked away. 3 sisters. Together. For the first time in years. We got into my car. No one spoke until we reached a diner off the highway, a 24-hour place with sticky tables and terrible lighting, perfect for people who no longer had anything to hide. We sat in a booth, ordered food we wouldn't touch, and let our phones buzz nonstop. Angry messages, threats, apologies, pleas, confessions. Minutes turned into nearly an hour before my phone rang. A number I didn't know. I answered. A woman's voice shaking. "Is this the person who posted about the journals?" "Yes. I'm his sister," she said. "Your aunt. I just saw everything." Her breath hitched. "He did the same to me. 60 years ago. I thought I was alone. I never told anyone. But I will testify. I'm 73. I won't die with this secret." When the call ended, I looked at my sisters. "It goes back further," I said quietly. "Much further." They didn't look surprised, just tired. Tired in a way that felt like centuries living behind their eyes. Before any of us could speak again, my younger sister's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and went still. "It's Mom," she said. "She wants to meet tomorrow. Just us and her. She says she has things she needs to say." My heart clenched. It's a trap. "Maybe," my older sister said, "or maybe it's finally the truth." She met my eyes. "Either way, we need to hear it." The next morning felt unreal, like waking up in a version of my life where everything was slightly off-center. Familiar, but altered. My phone had dozens of new messages from cousins, coworkers, numbers I didn't recognize. Some were furious. Some were apologetic. Some were confessions from people who had seen things, dismissed things, suspected things, but never said anything. Messages that all began the same way. I didn't know how to tell you. But none of them mattered compared to the message from our mother. "Meet me. Just you 3. I need to speak to you." We agreed on a public park, neutral ground, not her house, not anywhere private enough to fall into old patterns. I didn't trust her. Neither did my sisters. But we needed to know. Maybe she wanted to beg. Maybe she wanted to manipulate. Maybe she wanted to twist the narrative before it could solidify. Or maybe she wanted to do something she had never done in her entire life, tell the truth. We arrived together, three women who shared a childhood but not the same memories of it. The sun was still low, spreading a soft yellow across the grass. Birds chirped obliviously. A jogger passed by. Life continued, indifferent to what had shattered the night before. Mom was already sitting on a bench near a small pond, clutching a tissue in one hand. She wasn't wearing makeup, which was unusual for her. She always presented herself carefully. Hair done, lipstick perfect, clothes just right. Today she looked small, dimmed. When she saw us, she stood. "Thank you for coming." "We're here," my older sister said. "That's all." Mom nodded. Her hands trembled. She sat again, and we sat opposite her, like the 4 points of an unstable square. For a moment, none of us spoke. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and heavy. Finally, I broke it. "Why did you want to meet?" Her throat bobbed. "Because you deserve to know the truth." A coldness slid down my spine. "What truth?" She looked at each of us in turn, and something in her expression made my breath catch. It wasn't denial, it wasn't defensiveness, it was something closer to defeat, or surrender. "When I was 16, she began, her voice trembling, "my father, your grandfather, did to me what his son later did to you." The world didn't tilt. It didn't collapse. It just stopped for a moment. "What?" my younger sister whispered. Mom's face crumpled. He hurt me. For years. And my mother knew. She did nothing. She said it was my duty to protect the family. She said I misunderstood. She said girls exaggerate. My older sister closed her eyes. "Mom, I thought it would stop when I left home," Mom whispered. "But the shame doesn't leave you. It molds you, shapes you. So when I married your father, when his brother began showing signs, things I recognized, I didn't know what to do, except what had been done to me." Tears streaked down her face. "I told myself it wasn't happening, that you girls were safe, that I was imagining it. And when you told me otherwise, You shut us down," I said. My voice was low, controlled. "You called us liars." "I know," her voice cracked, "and I will regret it for the rest of my life." There was another long silence. My sisters were crying quietly. I wasn't. My anger ran too deep for tears. But something inside me shifted, not softening, not forgiving, just rearranging itself around this new information. "Why didn't you leave him?" I asked. "Why didn't you protect us?" Mom swallowed hard. "Because I didn't know how. Because I'd been taught that silence keeps a family together. Because I was a coward. Because I failed you." My younger sister hugged her arms to her chest. "Are you sorry? Or are you just scared?" "I'm sorry," Mom whispered. "I'm terrified too. But mostly I'm ashamed. And I want to make it right, whatever that looks like." "How?" I asked. "How do you plan to make any of this right?" She took a shaky breath. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm divorcing your father." We all stared at her. "He knew," she said quietly. "He knew what his brother was, long before you said anything. He knew things I told him about my father, and he still protected them both. I can't stay with someone who chose them over you." My older sister wiped at her eyes. "Dad always said we needed to keep certain things in the family. I guess now we know why." Mom nodded. "He believes this could have been handled privately. He thinks you girls overreacted." She shook her head slowly. "He doesn't understand that privacy is what allowed this to continue for generations." The realization washed over us like cold water. This wasn't a family issue. It was a legacy, a sickness passed down and preserved through silence. "What about him?" I asked. "Our uncle. Has anyone heard from him?" Mom let out a humorless laugh. "He fled. Went to his lake house up north. His lawyers are saying you're all conspiring against him, that the journals are fabricated. But I have letters too." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small bundle of envelopes tied with a ribbon. "He sent me these after my father died. They're disturbing. He bragged about things, said it was our family tradition. I'm giving them to the police." My older sister visibly recoiled at the phrase. "Family tradition? That's horrific," Mom whispered. We sat there in the sun, 4 women connected by blood and by wounds that had shaped our lives in different ways. What I felt wasn't forgiveness. It was clarity. Mom had been a victim. Mom had been complicit. Both things were true. "Will you testify?" I asked her. "Yes," she said without hesitation, "to everything." That single answer didn't fix anything, but it cracked something open, maybe a doorway to something resembling honesty. The next months moved like a storm, a fast, chaotic, unstoppable storm. The police found more victims. A cousin's daughter, 17. Assaults recent enough to prosecute. My uncle had fled to Canada. He was extradited back. The case built itself piece by piece. Journals, letters, testimonies from people who hadn't spoken in decades. We prepared for trial. My older sister and her husband attended therapy sessions, unraveling 12 years of buried terror. My younger sister began reading everything she could about generational trauma, drowning in knowledge she wished she'd never needed. Mom met with detectives, prosecutors, and psychiatrists, shaking every time but never backing out. Dad refused to participate. He refused to speak to us at all. And I practiced my testimony until my voice felt like sandpaper. I had nightmares almost every night. Panic attacks. Sudden waves of doubt that weren't mine. They were echoes of the lies my family had fed me for years. Then the trial began. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Sterile. Unforgiving. Rows of unfamiliar faces. The defendant's table. The judge. The lawyers. Reporters scribbling notes. My uncle looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just diminished, like the power he'd carried for decades was seeping out of him. They read from his journals, his words, his admissions, his routines, his calculations. Each one felt like being stabbed and vindicated at the same time. The defense argued we were lying, vindictive, that memories couldn't be trusted, that this was an orchestrated attack. But they couldn't outrun the evidence, or the other victims, or the patterns, or the truth. On the fourth day of testimony, as the prosecution opened another journal, I looked over at my sisters. We were holding hands. We didn't let go. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, extended relatives, strangers who had followed the case online, and a scattering of people whose faces we recognized from childhood, but whose loyalties had splintered since the truth came out. The air felt thick, like everyone was holding their breath at the same time. I could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights, the rustle of papers, the shifting of bodies on wooden benches. My uncle sat at the defense table, flanked by attorneys who looked as exhausted as he did. He wasn't the confident man who used to dominate every family gathering with loud laughter and false charm. He looked pale, smaller than I had ever seen him, deflated, as if the weight of everything he'd hidden was finally crushing him. When the jury filed back into the room, my heart pounded so hard it almost drowned out everything else. My older sister sat beside me, fingers digging into my hand. My younger sister sat on my other side, shoulders shaking with silent breaths. Mom was behind us, clutching tissues in both hands. Dad sat several rows away, stiff and cold, expression blank and unreadable. The foreperson stood. The judge asked if they had reached a verdict. They had. On the charges involving recent victims, the ones whose cases were still within the statute of limitations, the jury found him guilty, on every count. The words echoed in the courtroom like a rupture. Guilty, guilty, guilty. My uncle didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, fists trembling. My brother let out a sharp sound, something between a gasp and a growl, then stood abruptly and stormed out, muttering something under his breath about injustice and betrayal. His chair scraped loudly against the floor, but he didn't look back. When the judge announced the sentence, 23 years, my younger sister broke into quiet sobs. My older sister slumped forward, shoulders shaking. Mom covered her mouth with both hands and wept. I felt something shift inside me. Not joy, not triumph, something deeper. He would die in prison. And the long, twisted legacy he had continued was finally, officially, publicly broken. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. We didn't answer. Our lawyer handled the statements. We left in silence, moving together like a single unit through the chaos. People stared. Some reached out to touch our arms. Others whispered. Some avoided our eyes entirely, ashamed for not seeing what had been hidden in plain sight. In the days that followed, the aftermath came in waves. The family fractured along familiar fault lines. Our brother refused to speak to us, claiming we had destroyed his image of a good man. Some cousins defended us. Others defended him. Family gatherings became impossible. The holiday texts stopped. The group chats dissolved. Mom divorced Dad. She signed the papers quietly without ceremony. She moved into a small apartment across town, a place filled with sunlight and silence. She started therapy for the first time in her life. Some days she called just to cry. Some days she called just to sit on the phone without speaking. My older sister and her husband threw themselves into trauma therapy. Their marriage bent, strained, nearly broke, then slowly began to rebuild on foundations of truth instead of repression. She started writing. Not a journal this time, a book. A memoir about survival, silence, complicity, and the cost of truth. She said putting her story on paper gave her power over it in a way she had never had before. My younger sister enrolled in a master's program in social work. She wanted to help children like us, children whose families dismissed them, silenced them, failed them. She spent her days studying systems that were supposed to protect people but often didn't, and she promised herself she would be the person she needed when she was 14. As for me, I moved to another city, a new beginning. I joined a support group for survivors of familial abuse, then eventually started one of my own. I learned that our story wasn't rare, not even close. Families all over the world were built on similar patterns of silence, fear, and generational damage. I learned that telling the truth isn't a single act. It's a practice, a muscle you have to flex again and again. 2 years after the trial, the three of us, me, my older sister, and my younger sister, took a trip to the coast. The same stretch of shoreline where I had walked on the morning of the wedding, feeling like I was alone in the world. This time, we stayed in a small rental house with creaky wooden floors and windows that let in the relentless crash of waves. We cooked dinner together, drank wine, stayed up late talking about everything and nothing at all. On our last night, we built a fire on the beach. The air was cold and salty. The flames crackled, sparks flying toward the dark sky. We brought the journals, the originals, returned to us after the trial was over. We hesitated. For all the horror they contained, they were also evidence, proof, the reason no one could ever deny what had happened. But they had served their purpose. They no longer needed to exist. One by one, we fed them to the flames. Pages curled, blackened, lifted into the air as ash. The fire reflected in my sister's eyes, turning them bright and glassy. My younger sister broke the silence first. "Do you think we did enough?" I looked at her, at the flames, at the ocean behind us, waves forming and collapsing again and again. My older sister answered softly, "We told the truth. We broke the silence. We paid the price for it. I think that's enough." "And if it happens somewhere else?" my younger sister asked. "In another family? To someone else?" "Then maybe," I said quietly, "they'll hear about us. And maybe they'll know they're not alone." We stayed there until the embers faded, until the ocean swallowed the last bit of light in the sky. I thought of the girl I used to be, the one who spoke up at that birthday dinner and was cast out for it, the girl who questioned her own memories because everyone around her insisted she was wrong, the girl who carried the weight of rejection and silence alone. I wish I could tell her she wasn't crazy. I wish I could tell her she wasn't wrong. I wish I could tell her that in the end, she would not be alone. But time only moves forward. Now I build a different kind of family, a chosen one, a truthful one, a family where protection is given, not withheld, a family where silence is not demanded, a family where truth is not punished. Somewhere in a box in my closet, the original wedding invitation still exists. I kept it, not as a token of pain, but as a reminder, a marker of the moment when everything hidden finally came into the light. Some days the weight of what we survived feels heavy. Some days it feels impossible. But then my phone buzzes with a text from one of my sisters. A joke, a photo, a memory. And I remember, we made it out, together, finally together. And that's not nothing, that's everything.